Hey everybody, it's Sue from slowideas.com. Do you find reading sewing patterns kind of confusing? There is a lot of information on there. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through the information on a sewing pattern and help you figure out what you need to know to make sure that your project gets you a garment that makes you happy. I've been sewing for 23 years or more, and I have learned a lot about reading a pattern. So when my friend Karen suggested to me that my next video could be a topic about reading a sewing pattern, I thought that's a great idea. And then I started jotting down some notes, and it has turned into what I think is going to become a 4-part series. So for today, we're going to look at reading a pattern envelope and all of the information that you need to know before you buy your pattern to make sure that it's going to work well for you. In future videos, we will look at getting a pattern tissue ready before you cut out your fabric, and then we'll look at cutting that fabric, and we'll look at some of the strange and bizarre language that they use in sewing instructions. I hope you enjoy and come along for the ride. Please be sure to like the video and hit subscribe on the red button down there so you find out when I post new videos in this series or some of my other sewing videos. Okay, let's get started. Okie dokie, I've got my iPhone here set up as a separate camera so that I can show you some of the patterns that I've pulled out of my collection because they illustrate different parts of pattern envelope reading that I think will be helpful. So let's start with looking at the front cover of the pattern. I've got a McCall's, a Butterick, and a Vogue pattern here for us to go through. There are lots of other pattern companies out there, and many of the independent ones sell online. But most of the same information is going to be on those websites or on the envelopes for the independent pattern companies. I've chosen these three because they just illustrate different types of garments and they're relatively recent. I have some really old patterns and I wanted to choose things that would probably still be available to people buying their patterns now. So I've got this McCall's athletic wear pattern. This is a Butterick skirt pattern. This is Butterick 5566. And then I have this Vogue pattern, and it is a little bit older. I bought it in 2017, so it might not still be in print, but I may actually make this as one of my next projects. So if I do that, then I'll walk you through. You'll see more of this pattern in the videos to come. So let's look at some of the pictures that they have on these, and I'm going to get a little bit of camera shake here as we try to get further away so you can see the whole envelope. So the pattern envelope generally shows what the style is like in the designer's mind. So they've made up a sample of the garment for one of the views, if there's multiple views, and they're trying to style it in a way that makes it look attractive. They will show you the different patterns that are available. So this one has 6 different skirts included in it. So it shows each of those in sketches, as well as they show it on a real live person. With some patterns, they will actually show it drawn as a fashion sketch. And the thing to be aware of with that is that fashion drawings are actually not in proportion to a normal human body. The usual fashion croquis, which is the model that they use for fashion drawings, has a 1:9 ratio for head to body, and the normal human body has a 1:7 ratio. So these drawings and the pictures on the front of the envelope are meant to sell the pattern and make you excited about wearing it. But unless you have a very elongated body, you have to sort of use your creativity to think about how is that pattern going to actually look on you. And there's a lot to be said for knowing what styles work for you and what styles don't work for you. Just because you make a dress doesn't mean it's actually going to look good on you. It has to be a style. It has to be your style. that works well on you. So you learn that from shopping and looking at other garments and stuff like that, and bring that knowledge into the sewing arena so that you can make wise pattern choices. There's nothing worse than going to all the work to sew a garment with really pretty fabric and what you think is an amazing pattern, only to find that it is not at all flattering for you. It's not your style in any way. And I have so much experience with this, unfortunately, but I am getting better at picking my patterns. So that is what you want to bear in mind when you're looking at the front of the pattern. The other thing you want to make sure that you're checking is what the style range is. So McCall's, Butterick, and Vogue all sell their patterns in 2 style ranges, whereas most other pattern companies such as Burda, Quick Sew, New Look, a lot of the independent companies like Jolly Patterns, they will all sell a full size range in one pattern, so you can't take a pattern home and find out that you've bought it and it does not have your size in it. But that is something to keep in mind. Also, you need to know the pattern number, because you often need to use that to either order it or ask the clerk at the fabric store to get you your pattern. Alright, so now we're looking at the back of one of our patterns here. This is our Butterick skirt pattern, and I'm just going to draw your attention to a couple of things as we're looking at it full size, and then we're going to zoom into some other parts of the back of the pattern. So at the top here we have a difficulty rating. Now, I've looked through many of my patterns. Not all of them will have a difficulty rating, but it is fairly common to see, and those are to guide you so you know like how many really tricky construction details are involved in making the pattern. I've seen some patterns that actually look fairly complicated. There's a couple of Vogue dresses that come to mind, but they're marked as easy, and I would say that sort of have a caveat with buying Vogue patterns, because I have found that even their average patterns tend to be more difficult than a McCall's, Butterick, or other types of patterns. They do tend to do more challenging designs and have more challenging seam lines to sew. That shouldn't discourage you necessarily, but just be prepared for what you're getting into. So also on the pattern envelope, you're going to see, I'm going to try to zoom in here, we've got our technical drawings, and these are to show you what the garment looks like, free from the distraction of any particular fabric that may have been shown with the garment on the front of the pattern. So this shows us the different seam lines for this skirt. So we have A, B, and C, and D all have different styles of the front, and on the backs we see A, B, and C have 2 darts on each side of the back, and then D has these shaped seams, and you can also see in there that it shows there is a zipper in the back of D and E. You get used to looking at these and reading the technical diagrams, and they can often give you hints as to what to expect when making a garment that you wouldn't notice just from looking at the front of the pattern envelope, which won't show you the back in any way. And in actual fact, I've made this skirt a couple of times now. It actually can be made without the zipper if you have very stretchy fabric, but those are things to bear in mind that technical diagram shows you. So I'm just going to show you this athletic wear pattern as well. It shows the different styles here. We've got style A can have contrast fabric, and it has that plain neckline. Style B has the hood added. Style C shows the hood and the kangaroo pocket, and then D has the different options for the leggings. And in our Vogue pattern, it actually only has just the one technical drawing, just the front and the back, to show you what's going on. There's only one style included in this envelope, and that is all you get. The next thing we're going to look at is the garment description. Aside from just being a nice piece of text that describes the garment, it actually gives you some really interesting hints as to what you're getting yourself into. For example, this dress, you can't tell from looking at the pictures that it is in fact lined, so it tells you that it's lined, and it includes a little visitor named Geisha. The pattern description also includes the words close fitting through bust. And that gives you an idea of how much ease there is in the garment. So let's just talk about that word ease. When a pattern designer puts together a pattern, they have to include extra fabric or extra size in the garment, because if you made a garment exactly to your measurements, it would be absolutely tight and you wouldn't be able to move unless it was stretchy fabric. So when pattern makers change the amount of fabric for a garment so that it will flow around the body in a certain way, there's something called wearing ease, which is just what's required so that you can move in it. And thanks a lot, Geisha. There is something called design ease, which is where something is either loose fitting, like this t-shirt is fairly loose fitting. I would actually call this probably a fitted t-shirt, but not a close fitted t-shirt. And this dress, for example, is close fitting around the bust. And if something has a more drapey feel to it, you might actually see it say loose or very loose. And that gives you an idea of sort of how much extra forgiveness space is in that pattern. So there's the wearing ease, which is what's required so you can move, and the design ease. And this is going to become a little bit more important as we go on. So remember those words. So this description also tells us that it has an invisible back zipper, and there's a hemline vent, which you also can't see very well on the picture, but it draws your attention to that. So these are hints to what kind of construction details the garment has in it. In our garment description for the athletic wear, it actually describes what each of the views has that's different. So they all have princess seams. The A has a neckband, the B has a lapped collar, the C has a seamed hood, and so on. So it just gives you a little bit more awareness of what you're buying when you're getting it. And our skirt pattern also has what the difference is between the different styles in the pattern. The next piece of information that's really vitally important to know about so that you can get this garment to look good on you is the suggested fabrics. These are not just random suggestions. When the pattern designer has put together their garment, they are assuming that the fabric used will have certain properties of either stiffness or looseness. It will have a certain amount of drape and movement around the body. It will be soft and forgiving or very supportive. And if you try to make a garment that is meant for something that's soft and drapey, you make it with a more stiff fabric, it's not going to look like it's supposed to look. So for that reason, they put the fabric recommendations on there. And different pattern companies will be more or less specific about what fabrics they want you to use. So in this case, for our athletic wear, it's suggesting, for the skirt, it's suggesting lightweight gabardine, stretch wovens, lightweight broadcloth, and lightweight denim. So these are all fabrics that hold their shape fairly well, and they're going to give support to the body, because these are, as it says, semi-fitted skirts. And so it's not supposed to like flow around the body. These are supposed to hold the body just gently, not super skin tight. So our activewear here, not surprisingly, it is suggesting two-way stretch knits, performance knits, cotton blend knits. And Burda patterns will very seldom be particularly specific. They will say something like jersey knits or something like that, like stiff wovens or something like that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but these are guides to what to use for your garment if you want it to look like the pattern designer thought it would. When you are making something with a knit, you will see somewhere on your pattern this kind of gauge. And this tells you what percentage of stretch your fabric should have. It gives you a 10 centimeter long bar and tells you that it should stretch a certain amount. So in this case, this 10 centimeters is supposed to stretch an extra 5 centimeters So that's 50% stretch. If you are buying fabric online, which many people do nowadays, you're looking for something that has 50% stretch. If you get something with less stretch, then what will happen is the clothing will not fit right. It will be too tight. So you might have to make yourself a larger size to have it fit the same. But you're just best to look for something that has that certain amount of stretch. And in this case, it is looking for, it only needs 2-way stretch knits. Sometimes they will say they need 4-way stretch knits, especially for actually like yoga pants and stuff like that, because they need to stretch around the curves of the body as the curves are bending. So it creates a demand for more fabric, let's just say, something that Lululemon did not get right. So you want to follow those suggestions. If you're in the store, you can just grab yourself some knit fabric, hold up 10 centimeters or hold up a bit so that it fits from, point A to point B, and then stretch it and see if it reaches to the end of the gauge. And if it does, you're golden. Another interesting thing you'll see on garment patterns is this with nap, without nap question. Nap is a texture in a fabric that is comes up from the manufacturing process. So there may be raised threads, or it may be like extra fluffy, or like velvet or corduroy, things like that, where the light hits the fabric and reflects off of those textures in a different way if the fabric is oriented back to front. So if you have a fabric with nap, you need to cut out all of the pieces facing in the same direction, top to bottom. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll have one piece and the next piece beside it will be the same fabric, but it will actually look completely differently because it's upside down. Similarly, if you may have just a simple basic cotton, but if it has a print on it, then you want to make sure that you have everything facing one way. So for example, I have this fabric here with these little these girls with holding umbrellas on them, and I made a coat of it and it has panels across the body, so I had to make sure that all of my pieces were facing the same direction. And what happens with that is sometimes when you're laying out your pattern pieces, you can actually make your pattern pieces fit more closely together if you can put them upside down to one another and kind of Tetris them together. But if your fabric has a nap, you don't want to do that. So the fabric instructions will say there's a certain quantity with nap or without nap, and it uses these asterisks. And in this particular pattern, this is our Vogue dress, it actually does not have a difference, but you will see some patterns where there is a 1 asterisk, so that is how much you need if your fabric has nap or directionality, and 2 if your fabric has no nap. And then there's sometimes a 3 asterisk option, which is with or without nap. So that's kind of wacky. The other thing it will tell you is if this pattern is suitable or unsuitable for obvious diagonals. So in this case, because our dress is paneled and it has these shaped seams, it would look really whack if I made it with diagonal seams going across there. When in doubt, if you've already bought your pattern, you can use a pencil to kind of sketch in some of the design features of your fabric and figure out how it would look before you buy the fabric. So how much fabric should you buy? Well, before you know what fabric you should buy or how much, you need to know what size you're going to make. And for that, most patterns, actually all patterns, will have their sizing chart. And I wish I could tell you that all pattern companies use the same sizing chart. It used to be true, but there's been such a proliferation of pattern companies in the last 20 years. Yay! And a lot of them will use different sizing. So Vogue, McCall's, and Butterick all use the same sizing because they are the same pattern manufacturer. I believe that Simplicity may also use that same set of measurements, which are based on averages of about 1,000 American women in the 60s. So you can guess there might be some issues with proportions. Burda uses European sizing, so their sizing actually runs a little bit slimmer than McCall's Butterick Vogue and Simplicity does. Quick Sew, which is actually sold now by the McCall's company, their sizing is actually a little bit more generous than their other brands are. For every pattern company, you need to know what sizes and measurements go together. So there will be a chart and it will have the different sizes that are included in the pattern company's range, and it'll show the bust, waist, and hip measurements. And in some cases, they will actually also include a back waist measurement, which is an interesting detail. But mostly it's bust, waist, hip, and if you're looking for measurements in centimeters, just read the French. So what you want to do is you want to look, you have to take your own measurements, and then you want to look at what measurements correspond to which sizes, and get out of your head what size you wear in ready-to-wear clothing. It is irrelevant. In fact, a lot of pattern companies have stopped using numbered sizes and are going to lettered sizes just so people can get those numbers out of their head. I applaud that. So if you are making a top or a dress, you want to choose your pattern size according to your bust measurement. If you are making pants or a skirt, you choose according to your hip measurement. The reason we choose these is because those are the most difficult measurements. That's the most difficult part of the pattern to actually make adjustments to. You want to get those right, and then it is really easy to change the waist measurement on a pattern. It's more difficult to change the hips on a pants pattern because you have the whole crotch thing going on, and crotch fitting is something that sewists spend days, weeks, months, years talking about and trying to get right. So in this case, this is a dress and I want to fit for my bust measurement. But here's another little trick for those of you who have a C cup or a larger chest. Most pattern companies will design for a B cup, which means that they assume the measurement, like the full bust measurement, is 2 inches larger than the chest. Across here or across here. They will assume there's 2 inches of difference. If you are a C cup or bigger, of course, you know that you have a 3-inch difference for C cup, 4 inches for D cup, and so on. And this pattern, if you buy according to the bust measurement, you will end up making something that is much larger than you actually need to fit your neck and shoulders and armholes. So the thing to do is actually take your high bust measurement, which hits you here and goes under the armholes and then parallel to the floor. And you want to use that measurement, and then you'll end up doing what's called the full bust measurement or full bust adjustment. I'm so going to make a video about that. But for now you can Google it, and there's lots of videos and stuff like that online. But I want to make my own because I do a full bust adjustment on almost everything I make. So if I were to measure myself across the regular bust, I would be looking at probably around 44, and that would have me not able to make this dress at all. However, when I measure my high bust measurement, it is actually 37, sometimes 38, depending upon how many Doritos I've been eating. So in this case, that would actually have me making a size 16. And I know from experience that if I make a size 18 or 20, I end up having all this extra fabric up here. If I make a size 16, the neck and everything fits me perfectly. Then I do my full bust adjustment, I make it bigger at the waist, I make it bigger at the hips, and everything from there is fitting, but it is really hard to get all of this right. So that's why you use your high bust and not your full bust measurement when you're choosing a pattern size. Now, having looked at what my pattern size is, and according to the standard body measurements chart for this garment, the other thing I can look at is the finished garment measurements, which gives me a little bit idea of how big this is going to be in certain other locations when I get it done. In this case, what's important for me is the back length from the base of the neck. being a tall person, I am almost 5'11", and I know that most pattern companies design on a 5'6" model. Dress length is kind of important to me, and so I need to know how long this skirt is going to be, or this dress is going to be. If I'm looking at a skirt pattern like our butterick skirt here, I'm looking at the back length from waist and I'm seeing it is 21 inches long. So I'm going to know how much I might have to add in length to this pattern, and if it's saying 19 inches or something like that, I probably just won't even get it because it's just going to be ridiculously short on me. But these ones I know they work out. Now that I know what size I'm going to be making, I can finally figure out how much fabric I need to buy. So on this pattern, there's only one view, so it's really easy to read the yardage chart. I'm going to be looking at the imperial version, and then I'll flop over to the French version and try and find the corresponding number that tells me in meters how much fabric I need to buy. So I know I'm going to be starting with size 16 of this pattern, and I will be using either 60-inch wide fabric or 45-inch fabric. There's two standard widths of fabrics, and you got to know what you're buying. So if you buy narrower fabric, of course you won't be able to fit as many pieces across, so you have to buy a longer piece of fabric. So in this case it tells us sort of 2 1/8 yard, or when I look across, a bit challenging to move the camera there, when I look across at the French version, fortunately I can read French. It says robe, I read size 16, I follow down there, and this is telling me I need 2 meters of my recommended fabric. I actually usually will buy about 20 centimeters more than recommended because, as mentioned, I am taller and I'm going to have to lengthen things. So 20 centimeters gives me some wiggle room there. Don't forget when you're buying fabric as well that you're buying it as a pre-shrunk length. So you can ask the store clerk where you're buying it, how much is this going to shrink, and you need to buy extra fabric accordingly. Fabric can stretch anywhere from 10 to 30% depending upon what it is made from. It's not just cotton either. I have found rayon fabrics shrink quite a bit more than I expected them to. So I always buy a little bit extra fabric. So this pattern actually also tells you how much fusible interfacing you need to buy. Fusible interfacing is it's like an additional fabric, and it's got glue on it, and you stick it onto your fashion fabric, and it stiffens the fabric just a little bit. I'm thinking that this pattern needs it because of the neckline here. I think that the interfacing probably stiffens that, and so it holds up around the neck. So I know that I need to be buying 7/8 of a yard, or over here 0.8 of a meter of fusible interfacing. I will likely just get lightweight interfacing. I might buy medium weight. If my fabric is a little bit softer than what's recommended for the dress, I would go with a lightweight. You don't want to be putting a really heavy interfacing on a lightweight fabric because it just messes with the qualities of the fabric oh so much. This also tells me how much lining I need. So I need, and lining only comes usually in 45-inch widths. So in this case I need to buy 2.2 meters of lining. And again, I'm going to add about 20 centimeters to that so I don't end up short because I'm long. So it's really easy when there's only one view in your table to figure out what you're making. Our skirt pattern here has multiple different skirts, so you look down which skirt are you making. Skirt B has its regular fabric, and then it has this contrast fabric, so it tells you how much you need of both. Skirt C and D also has a contrast fabric, and skirt E, and then it tells you how much interfacing that you need. That's probably for the waistband. If you are looking at something with a additional styles. So our athletic wear here comes with, this is a pretty tricky chart actually, because this has contrast fabrics in most of the styles. So for each of the views, it tells you for view A how much you need, and most activewear cap fabric comes in 60-inch widths. And then it tells you how much you need of the contrast fabric for that. And something to bear in mind is that if a pattern tells you 60 inches is what you need, it's what you need. There are probably pattern pieces here that have to be laid out in such a way that they would not fit on a 45-inch wide piece of fabric. It may not be the case for this particular garment, but I have some cardigans, for example, that have sort of drapey back peplums on them, and I couldn't fit them on a 45-inch wide fabric. So to get the style, I have to buy the wider fabric. So this is just giving you all of the different required fabrics, and so you just sort of go down, and I tend to actually try to circle what I'm making in pencil, and that way it helps me keep my mind clear when I'm at the cutting table and asking for various things. Okay, the last thing is the notions, and so it sort of appears in some different places on different patterns. Here's our butterick skirt, and it is saying here, notions. For all of these different views, it needs a 7-inch zipper and hook and eyes. So pretty simple at the back. Our active wear doesn't actually require any notions. They never tell you about thread. They assume you're going to buy thread. And our Vogue dress here requires one 24-inch invisible zipper. So that means that the coils appear on the back of the zipper. 8 yards of corded edge piping. That's just something you buy either off the roll. You can also make it yourself. There's Google tutorials. I've done it in the past. It's surprisingly simple, but time consuming. And it also needs a hook and eye. You need to pay attention to different views because they might have different notion requirements. I've just popped up a men's shirt pattern here. We're just looking at that. There's the technical drawings, and the different styles have different button arrangements. So in our notions list, it says shirt A, 7 half-inch buttons. Shirt B and C need 9. Shirts D and E need 11 buttons because the shirt itself has different pocket options, and some of them have buttons and some of them don't. So you want to pay close attention to which view you're making and get everything on that list for your view, otherwise you are going to be making another trip to the fabric store, which means you will just buy more fabric if you're me. But that's not a problem, right? So I hope you've enjoyed our little tour of pattern envelopes. Please remember to subscribe to my channel so that you can find out when I get around to making the rest of the videos in this series. And as always, if you have any questions about sewing or garments or pattern envelopes or fabric, please feel free to ask them in the comments. I absolutely love helping people who are getting into sewing. So do me a favor and ask your question. Thanks everybody, and be safe.